Hello, I'm Gloria Picard, co-president of the League of Women Voters of Orange County, and I am very glad to welcome you to today's Hot Topics. We are pleased to bring this to you free of charge and to also simultaneously broadcast this session on our League's Facebook Live channel. Today's hot topic is how the loss of local journalism impacts democracy. You know, the League's mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. So this topic is extremely important to us, and we are grateful to our Hot Topics chairs, Sue Gilman and Barbara Lanning, for the foresight to organize it for this month, right after the most consequential election of our lifetime, that included not only votes for president, but also many candidates and amendments that directly impact our local democracy and quality of life. We rely on local journalism to keep us truthfully informed. Let us begin, like we do all of our hot topics, with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We also want to acknowledge that we perhaps have some newly elected office holders and some continuing office holders with you who are joining us today. So if you are with us as an elected official, please announce yourself in the chat. Let me begin with just a few Zoom housekeeping announcements. So first, all the audience lines are muted. The webinar is being recorded, and the video will be posted on the League's YouTube website under Playlists, Hot Topics. It will be available for viewing within a few days. The chat is open. To send a message to all attendees and panelists, select all panelists and attendees next to the "to" sign in the chat box. Chat messages to all attendees will be available for viewing. Also, please be advised that any chat you do privately can be seen by the host. Since this webinar is being recorded, please post any questions to the panelists in the chat box. Now, to introduce our topic and our moderator, so we just can get underway right away. According to the New York Times, more than 1 in 5 local newspapers have closed in the US over the past 15 years. What difference does it make to our democracy? Let's consider just 2 examples. A Neiman Reports article by our panelist, Mary Ellen Kloss, reports that the following, quote, "There's evidence that as local news disappears and political information becomes more nationalized, voter polarization increases. One key sign, split ticket voting. The inclination of voters to choose candidates regardless of party affiliation decreases in presidential and senatorial elections. More than one study has shown that decreased awareness in local and state politics leads to lower voter turnout and less civic engagement." She goes on to report, "There is no academic research to measure the impact in the decline of journalism on corruption. But finance professors at the University of Illinois at Chicago and the University of Notre Dame found data that shows what it costs taxpayers." Their conclusion, when newspapers close, the loss of government monitoring can substantially increase the cost of local government for taxpayers. They found that with fewer watchdogs, government salaries rise, deficits increase, and borrowing costs goes up by 5 to 11 basis points. In dollar terms, an additional 10 basis points increases the cost of an average bond issue by a whopping $650,000. As you can see, the stakes are enormous, and we have an excellent panel to dive more deeply into the issues and discuss what League members can do to help. To guide our discussion today, we have Mr. Rick Edmonds, from the Poynter Institute for Media Studies. For those of you not acquainted with Poynter, it's a nonprofit journalism school and research organization located over in St. Pete. The school operates PolitiFact, among other properties. Don't most of us regularly turn to PolitiFact as one of our preferred resources to distinguish fact from fiction? Mr. Edmonds is Poynter's media business analyst, co-author of 10 State of the News media reports, and a former Tampa Bay Times and Philadelphia Inquirer editor. It is obvious to us he is the right person to moderate this distinguished panel, and he will introduce our guest speakers. Rick, I'm turning the discussion over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. Thanks for the invite and a nice introduction for me and for Pointer. I want this panel to be about the present and future, but for a very quick introduction, let me turn to what's happened over the past. And I think most of you will remember, you wind back the clock 20 years, that you'd wake up every morning to have big, thick paper in your driveway, and it had a lot of advertising in the paper, big classified section, a lot of inserts, especially on Sunday. Over time, the internet and the big platform companies, Facebook and Google particularly, have really eroded all of that advertising, and they've caused some loss of subscribers to alternate sites, or as Mary Ellen said in that Neiman piece, some people turn to national news and neglect local news. Where we are now is that newspapers are trying to reinvent themselves. We'll talk some about how that's going, and then there are new sources of news. So I don't think it's a hopeless picture, but it's definitely a troubled one with some of the difficulties that Gloria alluded to. I'm going to introduce the panelists in sequence rather than all at once, and ask each of them a beginning question, and then we'll sort of pivot to some additional questions and your questions and any discussion they want. And I'm going to start with Mary Ellen, whose work I've been reading for years. I don't think we've ever met in person, but reading her work and the work of the Tallahassee Bureau reminds me of a wise saying somebody said, which is defining news as what the powers that be really would prefer you not know. And I wondered if you could talk, Mary Ellen, about accountability and investigative reporting. You and your Bureau do, perhaps particularly in the context of Governor DeSantis, who I think sometimes fits that description, and the particular challenges of reporting on the coronavirus impacts.
Yes, thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for this invitation. This is an issue I've devoted a lot of times thinking about, covering the disappearance of local news. And one of the things that I am watching is that, Tallahassee's press corps was pretty robust. I started 30 years ago up here, and I've stayed in this town, and it's rare where somebody stays on a beat as long as I have, but I've watched the trajectory of the news of what's happened. And I can absolutely see a connection between the loss of reporters in Tallahassee asking questions and being there, and the behavior of government officials. They don't think they're going to get caught. They act as if they will never get caught. And then when they do get caught, it's a great story for us, right? But that's, there should be something else at play here. Our Bureau has shrunk also. When I started, I started at the Miami Herald in 2004. We had 5 reporters up here and dozens of reporters coming throughout the year. In 2008, the Bureau, we had the recession, and our Bureau decided the only way to stay alive was to merge with the Tampa Bay Times. And by collaborating that way, we decided to just divide up the beats, divide and conquer, share everything, and the result has been very effective. We are now down to 4 reporters. We started with 8 in the Joint Bureau, so we've been cut in half in that amount of time. But what we do is we try to not let the government decide what our agenda is. Our agenda is what we think the public needs to know. And that's becoming harder and harder. And I could go on more about this, but the bottom line is Florida government has professionalized its public relations status. And I think in the last few years, and particularly under this administration, we have watched as public information officers are not really there to help provide information to the public as much as they are the gatekeepers to message and manage the message. And we've found during this pandemic, it's been particularly difficult to get access to they want to give us a message and we want to challenge them on it. And so we want to see the data behind their conclusions. They wouldn't let us, it's just starting in November, in March, we said, you're saying that nursing homes and assisted living facilities and so forth aren't seeing that much, that many coronavirus cases. Well, we want to know how many cases you're seeing. And we asked them for that and they refused to turn it over. So we had to get a coalition of news organizations together to sue them. Once we were about to go to trial or for our first hearing, then they turned over the data. We did the same thing when it came to prison information. We wanted to know what kind of prison deaths there were because of COVID. They wouldn't turn it over. We ended up threatening a suit. They turned it over. We did the same thing with schools. So it's just been one pattern after another. Now they have a fancy dashboard. It's very good. It's full of very, I think, reliable information, but we don't know how much but we've also watched as that data has shifted and changed, and they won't give us access to the data on which they're building the dashboard. So these are the problems that keep mounting. We have so many unanswered questions. We have so many outstanding public records requests. I don't think the public has a good idea of what this administration knows about the extent of the coronavirus in communities. And I do think that some communities, Miami-Dade is a perfect example, they set up their own dashboard and started collecting the information from their public health officials and hospitals and other community providers. And they're posting that information independently of the state because the state's information was not reliable. I think that should be a point of caution for everyone. And I'll stop there and we can talk about more later, but thanks.
Great, thank you, Mary Ellen. I'm going to turn to Rick Brunson. Rick, I'm doing a bridge bios here in the interest of time. You can read the fuller ones. Rick has a long career as a writer, then another second long career as an instructor at the University of Central Florida. Welcome your quick thoughts on what's changed and evolved, but I really wanted to mainly ask you, and one of our audience members asked me to ask as well, what are you seeing in this generation of students? Are they still enthusiastic and optimistic? And will we see a different kind of journalism, either in how they do it or where they do it and its format? It's kind of a long-winded question, but hope that tees it up for you.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. It's good to be with you always, and to everyone on the league for the gracious invitation to be here today. So I would say this: UCF, we're a limited access journalism program, which means students have to apply, and we still in 2020 are turning students away. All of my classes this semester were full, which we were kind of breathing a sigh of relief. We didn't know if students would take a gap year during COVID, but all my classes are full. The most popular class that I teach, which gratifies me the most, is because it's an elective. It's one where students don't have to take, but they do. It's my mobile journalism class, where students produce every piece of journalism throughout the semester. It's public facing, and they produce it with a mobile device. So they're shooting video packages, capturing sound, producing photo galleries, writing, covering breaking news, and they line up to take that class. They're coming in still very idealistic. They still, by and large, are students in their mindset who see journalism as a career path to making the world and their communities a better place. They're not as cynical as you might think that they would be, being digital natives, and they're hopeful. Now, what we do see that is troubling for us as a faculty is we see high rates of attrition within the program. In other words, they get in and they get maybe 2 to 3 years in, and they see how hard the industry is right now and how hard it is to be a journalist in 2020 and meet all the demands and expectations that the industry has of you, that your audience has of you, There's so many platforms to feed. You're constant. I mean, journalism now is just 24/7. It's relentless. It can be exhausting. And, you know, I've been a journalism educator now. I'm in my 17th, going on 18th year. You know, earlier we saw students who, you know, would stay in for a while, for a good long time. And then, you know, you start getting into your 30s, maybe you start approaching 40 and you transition to PR or marketing for a saner life and, you know, maybe steadier hours. We're seeing students leave us with after graduating, and too many of them are leaving the industry before they even make year 5. So, and it's not because they're disgruntled or disillusioned. They just see how exhausting it has become to do journalism in our modern era, and they shift to something else. So that is troubling for us, because that's troubling for community journalism if we lose good young journalists that we need in the field. So,
thank you, Rick. We're going to switch now to Susan Distoli. I hope I got your name pronounced correctly. Susan is the news director of Channel 13, Spectrum News. And Susan, the cable and local broadcast industries, by contrast to newspapers, are pretty healthy and have at least a steady amount of money, or an increasing amount of money to spend. So I'd like you to talk a bit about, in this changing environment, what you see as the news mission and contribution of local TV, and of course, with some reference to what you're trying to get done and have accomplished at Channel 13.
So I think that local, and all of us have used that word, is the key. Here at Spectrum News 13, our focus is on local journalism. We don't believe communities can survive without local journalism. It's what we do. It's what our newspapers do. And by the way, I get a newspaper every day. I like the feel of the newspaper. It is, what we try to do here is make sure that we're involving our communities. One thing that is unique to Spectrum News 13 is we started 2 years ago something we called listening tours. And by that, we went out into the communities. We really didn't know what we were doing when we started this, but we simply went out into our communities with nothing other than really a notebook and a pen. And we talked to members of communities, particularly underserved communities. The places here, Pine Hills, Paramore, places like that, that normally the news media only shows up when there's a shooting or a robbery or a multiple murder. And we asked them to tell us about their community, what they saw in their community. And what we heard surprised us. There was pride of history. They want change. They have ideas for change. And that approach has really helped inform us, and it has helped inform our reporting. It's helped inform our storytelling. And really that's our focus. We think that's the way to connect. 10 years ago, the talk was pretty soon there's only going to be maybe 3, maybe 2 television stations left in any town. That hasn't happened yet, but that's always the concern. And I think the key is to be relevant. In terms of, are we being more successful than our brethren in the newspapers? Newspapers are as important or even more important, right, than television, because not everyone can afford Spectrum. Not everyone has that kind of time, but we all have this digital place where we play together. And I think what we're going to see perhaps is a lot more cooperation, a lot more sort of working with each other on things. Years ago, when I was at WSB in Atlanta, we did investigations with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and it was a wonderful, we sort of had the power of 2 different mediums. So I think that's critical. In terms of, and it's interesting, one of Rick's students is actually here at the station. She's doing fantastic. We had another one of his students who decided to leave after 3 months. Fantastic potential to be a great journalist, but just decided that maybe this wasn't right for her at this time. And I think that's the other thing that we're fighting is convincing people that this is really something they want to do. And I cannot think of a more important time that we need journalists, because someone has to be paying attention, as Mary Ellen said, to what the government is doing. Someone has to be asking questions, and that is our role and that is our mission. And I just can't think of a more important thing or why our viewers won't need us more. So somehow we have to figure this out, right? And that's the critical thing, I think, could be that cooperation, figuring out how to work together to make this all a better place, because that's what we all want. We all want to make a difference, I think.
Susan, you mentioned two things I was going to ask about, so maybe I don't have to have a long-winded question about it. I do want to ask a little bit more about collaboration. And I think the trend you highlighted is one of the really positive trends I see, which is greater emphasis in newsrooms on listening to the community, listening to what they want. I will guiltily plead to picking stories I thought were hot stories, and my reporters thought, and kind of saying, no, they'll love it, whether they did or not. But let's talk a little more about collaboration, because I think that's a bright spot. Mary Ellen mentioned the wisdom of bringing the Tampa Bay and Miami Herald bureaus together. There's a terrific collaborative, including many newspapers, a number of radio stations, maybe some TV as well. For a year or so, it's been covering climate change in Florida. I mean, talk about a shared topic. So is collaboration one of the ways forward that are going to sort of preserve the best of local journalism? And these ones, anybody who wants to jump in.
I will say that we did launch a new app about July. And one of the things we're doing there is we're collaborating with a number of local newspaper and other folks that are local and curating their content, helping support them as well. And again, with that emphasis on local and in just trying to serve the local viewers that we have, and we've done that across the country. So that's one way I think that the television, or at least one way here at Spectrum, we're collaborating with newspapers. But I'm a big believer in working together on projects that are critical to this community.
I have to say that when we merged at the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times merged our Tallahassee bureau, it was really a hard thing for newsrooms to accept. We had been arch enemies for decades, and it was really hard. I mean, I was the person who suggested the merger, and it was even hard. And my co-bureau chief was Steve Bosquet, who'd been my competitor for years. And it was hard to get them to open up. I mean, even within our newsroom, it was hard to get. So I'll tell you what, that was a hard thing to overcome, because competition is kind of like what we live by. It keeps our juices flowing. However, I think there's a new generation of reporters that see the value in this. And I think younger reporters are much more open to working together. And it's also because of the different skill sets that different bring. So at the Herald, we have WLRN, and we work very closely with them. We have reporters, we have shared reporters and shared reporting. And we've tried to integrate using more radio in our newsroom. We don't do enough of it. We also have had collaborations, of course, because organizations like ProPublica doing investigative and I-team projects. Part of the reason is because they're getting the funding. They're nonprofits, they can get funding, and then they come in our newsroom and work with our reporters. And I know that that's happening in other places, but I think, Rick, that collaboration, it totally makes sense. It's a smart way to go. And it's just hard. I think the obstacle is just kind of get old timers, Agree to it. That's the hardest thing.
Let me, did you want to jump in, Rick, please?
Yeah, just real quickly, I think this is a collaboration is a great place for universities to step in. And we see this all over the state. You see it, Mary Ellen, there in South Florida with FIU and at UCF. We've been collaborating with the Orlando Sentinel on a couple of different projects. When I was at the Sentinel for 21 years, either full-time or part-time. And when I went to work there, Seminole County here in Central Florida, we had a North Seminole County Bureau in Sanford and a South Seminole County Bureau in Castleberry. And now there's no Seminole County bureaus, and there's one Sentinel reporter who's tasked with covering all of Seminole County, which is impossible to do. So we got a grant a couple of years ago and was able to deploy 4 reporters to help cover small communities in Seminole County in partnership with us and the Sentinel. It was a great collaboration. This on Tuesday for election night, we had 20 journalism students team with the Sentinel to cover the polls in the precincts here in Central Florida, and it was a wonderful experience. I've been doing election nights for 36 years, and it was my most fun ever. And that's the thing I think that I try to do as an educator. We have to help people see that this is fun. There is no other, this is the fun part of democracy, is journalism and getting to do that. And that's what I try to imbue in my students. And what was great about Tuesday night is none of the students saw themselves in these siloed kinds of thinking. So we had broadcast students who were doing live stand-ups from the precinct on our campus. And then they were running out to Lake County and doing a print story for the Sentinel on how the election was affecting local businesses. So they don't see, they're not siloed in their thinking about their coverage. And I think that's the future, at least as I see it.
Yeah, let me try 2 other quick questions. And I see there are a bunch of them building up from the audience. I'll then shift over to you, Barbara. So Susan, you mentioned how much you enjoy reading the newspaper every day, having that print in your hand. I will tell you, if you lived in Tampa Bay, and if the rest of the audience did, you'd have to change a little bit, because the Tampa Bay Times, at least for the time being, prints only 2 days a week. And we've been sort of transitioning people to read an e-edition, if that's their preference, which is the same as the newspaper, only you go to digital and call it up. So I'll ask you, Mary Ellen, and anybody else, is the day coming when we won't have print newspapers anymore? Or how soon do you think that might be?
Somehow we're still limping by in the state. It's such a sad day when Tampa Bay had to go to 2 days a week. The Herald is down to 6 days a week. I'm not up to speed on where the others are, but everyone is shrinking their print shop. So, I mean, the bottom line is, it just doesn't pay anymore, and we're into cost cutting. I think with this pandemic, we're gonna face the pain faster, and I think it's inevitable that we are going to have to your door. I think there's room for creative thinking, and that is to get people to put the best of your journalism into a package. That the Washington Post used to have the Washington Post Weekly, and it was so great because it had the best read, the best written stories, and you just get it delivered in a tabloid. That's in the ideal world. I'd love to see us do that before we erase print altogether.
Yeah, so I would make the point, and I think you made it too, Mary Ellen, that for our audience, thinking ahead a little bit, and even right now, it's probably smart to prepare for a time when we have journalism from a lot of different sources. It's not all the newspaper anymore, though I'm a champion of newspapers, but it'll be in different media, and I think if we keep the journalism alive, losing that format is not going to be catastrophic. I did want to ask, we mainly talked about journalism, pivot a little bit to audience, because there are a couple things in the audience sphere that worry me. Some of the Pew studies and others have shown there's a fair group now that is much more interested, well, it's been pretty gripping, in the national story than what's happening in localities. I suppose we can envision younger people sort of passing through who feel that way. There's also a kind of a disturbingly large number. I'm going to say some of the surveys find it's 20%, 30%. People who really prefer to tune out the news. They think it's so depressing that they'd rather go about their lives and maybe get a jolt of the weather and traffic. And then, of course, there's the fake news crowd that doesn't believe us anymore. So I would ask, and as I said, then we'll turn it over to your questions. Work to be done either within the audience or in winning their attention to the important journalism.
So there's been simply a massive national focus right now because of the election. But in terms of when COVID first broke back in March, we found our audience was extremely responsive to every single bit of local information that we were able to provide. I don't know that, I'm not disputing the studies at all, but at least in my experience, it is that local, it is that community, it is providing the information that they need to know. And frankly, I don't think folks are that interested anymore in what we used to call the greasy spot, right? Which was, a very long time ago, there was a slogan where, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. That just isn't the way it is anymore. But in the same way that folks will stop and look at the accident on the other side of the road, there's some of that, you still see some of that, but I think most televisions are moving towards, most broadcasters, I should say, are moving towards something other than the sensationalism. It's still out there, and some still do it, and they do it amazingly well. But I do think there is a sense, and the research I've seen, is that the audience want a whole lot more than that. And if that's how you're going to get them, then they will go away. Which is why we focus on storytelling.
Good answer, thank you. Mary Ellen or Rick, and then I'm going to turn it over, Barbara and Sue, if you've harvested some questions for our panelists. I think we got
the only thing I'll just say is that the kind of reporting, we had the exact same experience where subscriptions went up when COVID hit, and we were providing people with really essential information about what was closed, which community was doing what, where we were seeing the numbers rise. Miami-Dade was obviously the epicenter of Florida's problems in the early part of this, and there was just enormous attention to what we were doing, and we took our newsroom and turned it into a coronavirus only shop. We had, because there was no sports, every sports reporter was doing something related to covering coronavirus. I mean, every beat, everybody was focused on this, and we just turned it around and just churned out. We also dropped our paywall because we knew this was essential, just like we do during a hurricane, essential news for the community. And those are the kinds of things that paid off because people were grateful for that. Now, that's months ago. Our beat reporters are back on their beats, but the kind of hard work and expensive work, really. You can't just take a camera and point it at something. You got to dig and ask questions. And those are the things that take time, and that takes investment and resources. And the public needs to understand that there's a cost to good journalism. And I feel like we need to do a better job of reminding people of that.
Rick, any thoughts?
Yeah, real quickly, I don't like to use this word and throw it around loosely or blithely, but I do think we face a real crisis in this country in this. Pew Research posted a survey on November the 2nd, right the day before the election, that polled Americans, surveyed Americans, and 85% of them said that 85% of Americans can't agree on basic facts. That's the crisis we're facing. We can't agree on just what a basic fact is anymore. And I think it behooves local journalism to find a way to focus on that we're not just mini-me versions of the national media that is polarized maybe in cable, where people go to Fox or they go to MS, but we do focus on facts and on facts that matter to our local communities, and that we aren't enemies of the people, but we are champions of the people. And I think we have to do a better job of conveying that message and distinguishing ourselves, that we're not just, local versions of what you see nationally, but we're here for you. We care about the issues that matter to you, and just be fact focused and fact driven.
Well, great answers, all of you. Thank you so much. We have about 20 minutes left, and let's make this a two-way conversation. Barbara, do you have some questions or comments from our participants?
Yes, apropos to what Rick just said, how do you fight all the misinformation on the internet? For example, the fake media.
Rick B or Ricky? You mentioned PolitiFact already, which is a big collaboration between the Tampa Bay Times and Pointer, and we have an international version of that too. Believe me, you think it's difficult here, try Brazil or Turkey. But other approaches to getting people to at least believe the good journalism that we're producing.
My most important and my most largest class at UCF right now is my Principles of Journalism class, which is really by another name, my media literacy class. It has 123 students, and what I focus on in that class is teaching media literacy, how to determine fact from fiction, how to think critically. It's really a civics class, if you think about it. And I think that's so important. Media literacy, we just have to help people learn to determine what is truth and what is not. And really important, how to understand their own biases, because we all have them. We all bring them to the table. We all bring them to the door. And how to, not, cancel them, but understand them, look past them, and be open-minded enough to consider other points of view that will pierce your own bubble that you may have created around yourself.
Okay.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to echo that, it's, the message to the journalists in the newsroom is you've got to make sure you get it right, and you've got to make sure you ask those extra 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Never take anything at face value. Don't believe everything that you read on the internet, and to report it in such a way that you are not coming down on either side, but that you are simply stating the facts. And also, I think we have to let our audience know that we're doing that. We have to make sure that our audience understands where we're sourcing our information from. We have to give attribution so that they get it, that whatever else is out there. And I get lots of emails from folks who are convinced, we're on the right or we're on the left, and we have prejudice either way, but they're never able to give me a specific example. It's just sort of this impression they have by just reading all sorts of stuff that's just not true. And it's tough. It's a really tough thing to do. And the best thing you can do is just to make sure you don't ever slide 1 inch over any side, and make sure that everything is always based in that fact, and that it is always based in the truth.
Okay, Mary Ellen, Here's a question since you were discussing COVID earlier. Are you using COVID stats from the woman who got fired by DeSantis? What is her site called? How different are her stats from the states? And is the policy of keeping public school stats secret still in place?
Thank you for that question. I have to be honest. I think if you do a search on Geo Rebecca, maybe you can find her blog and her website. But I have to say I haven't looked at it in a while. It's my I have not compared her site to the state site. The issues we've had with the state site is that they have used a different metric for counting cases and the dates of cases, and they haven't really given us the key as to how they've changed things. We actually had to break it down and try and discern it ourselves. So it's, it's one thing to give the public as much information as you can to show that cases or positivity rates are declining. But if those numbers are changing and you're not telling people what you've done to reconfigure them, that's not being very transparent. I just think they need to be far more aggressive with letting the public know, here's our raw data if you want to get it. Here's how we're interpreting it, and let people sort through that. And when it comes to the education data by schools, we are getting some access to that. Mostly we're getting, I think most journalists are getting it from their local school districts. I don't think the state is compiling it in any meaningful way for everyone to look at it on a statewide vantage point. And there are a lot of other things that there's information that the department's collecting and they're not releasing on many things like that.
And did I read that the governor has hired a new COVID statistician?
Yes.
The numbers on the state website don't even add up to themselves. That's the most confusing thing. And they refuse to explain where they came from. It's crazy.
It's almost as if it's designed to portray a narrative, and they just want us to draw some conclusion. And honestly, this is probably the most important issue that we've covered in our lifetime. It's a pandemic. Thousands and thousands of Floridians have died. Over 17,000 lives have been lost in Florida alone. It's like, we should be looking at this like it's a war, and we should be armed with as much information so that people can assess their own risk. And we just want to be the vessel for that information. We don't want to interpret it. We don't want to be judging it. We just want to present it. And this is a state with sunshine laws, and they won't give us access to that information.
There are parallels here with the election results on Tuesday. Look at it. We're fighting over math, which is a finite subject, right? Math. And whether it's the COVID numbers or it's the tallying of ballots, people are trying to spin the math. And you can't spin math. Math is math. It's what it is. And people are trying. And that just tells you, as Mary Ellen points out, the war there is over turning numbers into narrative.
Okay, I will throw this out to everyone. We've had a couple of people discussing our local Orlando Weekly opened up to donations during the pandemic because they lost a lot of event advertising. And another question on thoughts adapting newspapers to a nonprofit model.
Yeah, let me jump in on that one, but I will then turn it back to the other panelists, because I saw a good question, I think it was from Sue Foreman. So, who's going to pay the bills for the journalism we need? mentioning nonprofits, that's a promising source. Foundations, including local foundations, are discovering how important a need this is for communities and for democracy. That's one source. There are kinds of products such as newsletters, events that find sponsors. Of course, we can't do live events these days. But I would say the broad answer to who's going to pay for the news going forward is much more the audience. And that puts a real burden on professional journalists and for-profit enterprises to be really sure that they're producing something that's worth paying for. So I see that as one of the huge challenges right now and in the time ahead. But panelists, you want to jump in on any of that?
Anybody? Okay, so I'm going to go back to something that Susan touched upon, discussing the if it bleeds, it leads, and whether we should be doing more investigation into many of our hyper local leaders, including county and city commissioners.
So if the investigation is warranted, obviously we should be doing more investigative work. And that's what basic journalism is. It's just that investigative journalism is journalism with a little more time, because it does take more time. You have to get the facts right, and to do a good investigation, it generally takes a whole lot of work, a whole lot of digging, a whole lot of asking questions, a whole lot of double checking your assumptions if you've made any assumptions. But yes, absolutely. But you can't just sort of go off on every little thing that comes in over the transom. And we get lots of tips, as I'm sure Mary Ellen does too. And maybe 5% of them turn out to be actually have a factual basis to them. But in terms of it leads, it bleeds, I don't think that just doesn't work anymore. And I think all of us need to get beyond that.
Do you think that's the case here in Orlando? I mean, are some of your competitors taking that same tack?
I have seen a change in what folks lead with. I would not want to say anything negative about my competitors, because each of them, I think, do a fine job in their own way. Just that our focus here is not on if it bleeds, if it leads. Do we go after breaking news? Absolutely. Do we air it? Most of the time, not. We have a series of crime guidelines. And I'd rather spend the time for one of my reporters to, spend a little more time talking to a source or researching a story topic than I would to have them go chase a car wreck or a fire. If it's a major plane crash, yeah, we're there, because then that really is important to the public. But for the most part, that brand of news, I think, at least here, that's not what we're about, and that's not what we do. It really has to be about community and community issues. We've got housing issues here that was bad before COVID. It's a disaster now. There's the COVID issues. There's the job issues. There's talk about problems with government sites, the DEO site, and the issues with unemployment. There's lots and lots and lots of issues to keep every single journalist in Central Florida busy.
Hey, Barbara, there's a question I see in the chat that I think we haven't touched on, and even though time's limited, I hope we can. This is from Maria. I'll ask the panelists, how much disconnect do you think there is between newsrooms and the growing ethnic population of cities and other locations? I think that's on the to-do list of most journalism organizations, certainly including the Poynter Institute and the Tampa Bay Times.
Yeah, I have to say that at the Miami Herald, after the Black Lives Matter issues surfaced, it really forced us to do some introspection about how we as a news organization, not just the composition of our newsroom, which is not sufficiently representative of our community, but how we are actually focused on these stories and issues. So we actually did a survey of ourselves, and we did an audit of all our news, of every newspaper, of the top. We asked reporters to look at their own stories and audit who their sources were. And we did some serious looking and have a very long list of things we need to work on and improve. So the word disconnect is not an understatement. I think there is a disconnect. I also think we are aware of it and trying to meaningfully address that. But it's a hard thing to do. Number one, we're in a pandemic. We can't go in and into a community and just start talking to people with ease. And it's so, if there's anything I could urge people to remember is that if you have thoughts and feedback, just if you see a reporter's email, write them a note. I cherish everything I get, even from the people like I did the other day when I'd written a story about the coronavirus policy of the governor's office, people calling me some pretty nasty words, but I was grateful to get the feedback, I'll be honest. So we just don't, we're not in places right now where we can talk to people with ease. So we need more feedback from everybody.
I would echo Mary Ellen. There has been a disconnect. We're working on it just like they are. The listening tours that we do had really proved valuable. We've added just kind of a social justice franchise that everyone works on, but it's not enough, and we need to do more. And I would echo feedback. Reach out. If you see something you don't think is right, let us know. I appreciate, like Marilyn, I appreciate the feedback. I wish sometimes they didn't feel they had to just start out swearing at me right off the top. Can we have a discourse, right? Can we please just talk about this? But in every single feedback, there's a kernel of something there, right? And something for us to look at and to consider. So, we count on something a lot of folks have done is journalists have done is to have a community advisory board. And I think that's kind of a good idea. I haven't quite worked out how to do that in COVID, but that's like on my list of things to kind of seek out and see how we might make that work. But yeah, we got a lot of work to do.
Rick?
I would tell you that the next wave of young journalists that are just poised to wash into America's decentralized rooms are the most diverse group of young people I have ever seen. When I stand in front of them, I am looking into a sea of brown and black faces. They're already minority majority, and they are poised to make what we have all talked about for at least 20 years, a more diverse news industry. They are poised to make that happen, and they want to make it happen, and they are they're going to be agitated if it doesn't happen. And so they're waiting in their wings to take their shot.
Okay,
Send them my
seems
way.
like a great place to maybe wrap up. I don't know, Rick, Edmonds, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I have a couple. I want to praise you and Sue for putting this panel together. I think we've had a good balance of talking about the issues and the challenges, but particularly some of Rick's comments about a new generation, the solutions. And my perspective, having done this for 20 years, is it's unfolded very slowly. We're not really there yet in a transition and transformation, but there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of moxie in journalists, sort of old school, if you're pardon my saying so, Marianne and Susan. Still on the beat, they're still doing the job, and I hope your group takes a somewhat hopeful message from this.
Thank you. Thank you all. Sandy, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. You've been very informative and just a wonderful panel to listen to on the importance of really paying attention to local news. And so I just encourage everyone in our audience to support our local news and to make sure that you have subscriptions to our local papers like the Orlando Sentinel, and there's a few other papers out there like the Orlando Weekly was mentioned, I think, and we have a member who runs Pulp Town, and so it's great to be able to make sure that we're getting the local news that we need. And I love, Rick, we haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, but we've talked about the work that I do in my day job, but I love that you said you have to pierce your own bubble. And I think that's really important because there's a lot of discussion about partisanship. That's not the right word. Partisanship. And there, partisanship. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of discussion about that, especially with everything that's been going on, not only with our national election, but even locally here in Florida, and how we have areas that think differently from each other. And so it's really important for us to get the news, to get the right news, and to remember that all politics is local, and that the things that are happening around us are the things that affect our everyday lives. So really appreciate all of the insight that you all have given us today, because it's, like I said, been very informative. And I use PolitiFact on a regular basis. It's one of my, let me give you the real scoop on what's your conspiracies. So a couple of events that are coming up. One is, don't forget, if you see campaign signs on the side of the road, take them to one of the bins that are in Winter Park. We are in the process, thanks to our Natural Resources Committee, of recycling signs that'll be turned into fuel. And that's really exciting to not see them go in the landfill. We also have a new member orientation that is coming up next week on November 17th. If you're a new member or you're a member that wants more information, join us at 6:30 on November 17th, and I'm sure there'll be information in this week's newsletter. Look for that Thursday. We also will have our planning meeting coming up, and that's next year, but next year is going to be here before we know it, at least at the rate my year is flying by. So January 23rd, put that on your calendars so that you can be part of the planning for next year. And there's a lot of other things going on. Just make sure you're looking at your league calendar and that you sign up for the hot topics every month. We, again, appreciate all of your support and your participation in these hot topic events. Thank you, Barbara and Sue, for putting it together, and have a great rest of your day.